American Free Press Issue 39 and 40 September 25 and October 2, 2017. Build at Wall President moving forward with border security plans, by Mark Anderson. At a mid-September Southern California press conference, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, Acting Deputy Commissioner Ron Vitiello announced that procedures are underway to design and construct a physical wall along the southern border, using suitable technology and materials to achieve complete border control. The move is part of the Department of Homeland Security's plan to implement President Donald Trump's Executive Order 13,767 of January 25, 2017. That order requires border security and immigration enforcement improvements, toward the ultimate goal of building a full-fledged border wall. NBC affiliate KVOA Channel 4 in Tucson, Arizona reported, the Department of Homeland Security has issued an order to waive certain laws, regulations, and other legal requirements to ensure the expeditious construction of barriers in the vicinity of the international border near Calexico, Cali. The waiver was published in the Federal Register. Calexico, near Baja California, is an area of particularly high illegal entries, hence the current focus on that area. The U.S. border with Mexico, which is some 1,980 miles long, from the Pacific Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico, spans 6 Mexican states and 4 U.S. states, California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. It's the mostly frequently crossed international boundary in the world, with estimated legal crossings pegged at 350 million annually. It has 48 border crossing points, while some 12 million people are estimated to be living in the United States illegally. That's about the same number of people living in all the counties and municipalities that hug the border from one end to the other. There are 8 companies now involved in the wall project. Notably, an Israeli firm is among them. According to Israel National News, Elton North America, an Israeli-owned defense manufacturer with U.S. headquarters in Maryland, was one of 4 companies chosen to build a prototype for the border wall between the United States and Mexico. The company is a subsidiary of Israel Aerospace Industries. Some 200 companies vied for the tenders, which will provide a $300,000 to $500,000 grant to develop the model. In total, 8 companies are building prototypes for the nearly 2,000 mile long wall. 4 will be concrete and 4 will have see-through or smart walls. ELTA was chosen to work on the see-through walls project. The final project could cost up to $25 billion, having toured and photographed South Texas Poinsett, Progreso, Far, and Mission, while also checking the border fence status near Brownsville. This writer found the current fencing includes scattered incomplete sections, some of which are rusting. Several are surprisingly far removed from the actual border zone. This odd configuration, of which many Americans are unaware, creates major gaps through which immigrants illegally enter the country. Installing new fence sections often requires court actions to secure easements so affected private property owners are compensated for construction. The process can be messy, yet, while these and other challenges cannot be denied, the Trump White House seems much more focused than its predecessors in wanting to complete a border wall in tandem with reworking the NAFTA trade scheme. If this process were to help Mexico's economy, then the incentives for Mexicans to enter the United States in the first place would be reduced. A personal message from the editor. Their goal is to put us out of business. This week, American Free Press was attacked yet again by another powerful group backed by slash-and-burn speculator George Soros and the Clinton crime family. On September 19, Eric Ananoki, a research fellow for Media Matters, penned a blog post titled "After Trump Pardon, Joe Arpaio Gives Interview to Publication That Denies the Holocaust." The post leads with Joe Arpaio, the racist Arizona sheriff who was recently pardoned by President Donald Trump, gave another interview to an anti-Semitic publication that has repeatedly pushed claims that the Holocaust is a hoax. For those who don't know, Media Matters for America is a far-left activist organization that was founded by David Brock. It is funded by rapacious nation destroyer George Soros and the Clintons. It's worth mentioning that Brock used to be a conservative. In fact, he has been credited with single-handedly assassinating Anita Hill's character after she accused Clarence Thomas of making lewd comments during Thomas's Supreme Court Justice confirmation hearings. In the early 2000s, however, Brock reinvented himself, transforming into a character assassin for the neoliberal establishment by hitching his money-hungry card and smear machine to the Clintons. It's bad enough that Hananoki took swipes at Arpaio, but he had to dig especially deep to find anything to smear this newspaper with, going so far as to find old cached versions of web pages that had been cycled out of AFP site wherein writers had reviewed books, such as Victor Thorne's Holocaust Hoax Exposed. In addition, the writer went after AFP for selling a book by James Fitzer and another by John Larson Shudlick, two of the over 400 books and DVDs that AFP has available for sale. Readers may be asking themselves, who cares if groups like Media Matters, the SPLC, and the ADL malign the last real newspaper in America as a racist, anti-Semitic, or hate newspaper? The reality is, in 2017, it does matter. Consider our coverage in this week's edition. Thanks in large part to the violent mess in Charlottesville, VA, cities across the U.S. are scrambling to tear down Confederate monuments, change the names of schools, and cancel speeches and gatherings organized by conservative groups. It's not easy being politically incorrect in the United States of America these days. There can be no doubt that Wells Fargo canceled AFP's credit card processing account because of claims made by the SPLC and the ADL, accusing AFP of being anti-Semitic and racist. The fact is, AFP has never editorialized about the Holocaust. Moreover, we consider ourselves to be a family newspaper, so we would never publish profanity or obscenity. Instead, what we choose to do is fearlessly tackle the most contentious issues in the world in a fair and balanced format. If that makes us a target for the whiners, the censors, and the complainers, then so be it. We are perfectly comfortable with our role in this country as a news outlet providing unfettered debate about the most serious issues of our day. But what we are not okay with is organizations like Media Matters and the SPLC trying to force us out of business. We recently learned that, back in July, the same bloviator, who attacked us for interviewing America's sheriff, went after advertisers in an attempt to scare them out of doing business with us. For the most part it didn't work, but one advertiser, who was mentioned specifically in the ranter's screed, did stop buying ads from us. AFP has reached out to the advertiser, and we are working with them to start up their ad buys again. But it was a cheap shot and hit us in the wallet at a time when Google canceled our online advertising account earlier this year, which costs us several $100s a month. We have had several people, including a prominent lawyer in California, approach us about striking back against these groups. Legally speaking, that would be a hugely expensive proposition, though, especially considering groups like the SPLC have the backing of trillion-dollar corporations like Wells Fargo, Chase, Google, Apple and brainwashed Hollywood stars like George Clooney. In reality, the best way to get back at the self-appointed PC police is to be successful, and the only way to do that is to continue to grow our presence and effectiveness both in print and online. With that in mind, please take a moment to buy a gift subscription, renew your subscription, purchase a book or DVD, or make a donation. Every little bit helps. If you can, please take action to help today, and ask friends and family to do the same. Don't let the censors win. Christopher J. Petherick, Executive Editor. Against all odds, Trump presses on. Assailed by the left and right, President continues to unravel Obama's mischief. By Dave Gahary. President Donald J. Trump, under attack from the entire country, except for his core group of supporters, and most of the world, is in the unenviable position of being the only nationally elected representative of the United States. with its interests at heart. Most people who voted for Trump trust the man and feel he is trying to do the right thing for the country, but it seems he is being hamstrung by all those who don't support the America First president's mandate. History is clear. There has never been a U.S. president so universally opposed. Not only is the honeymoon over for Trump, he never had one, somewhat fitting for the first person in the White House's 227-year existence who lacked both political and military experience. The apparent visceral hatred for the man and his pro-American policies reached a fever pitch last week when Congress unanimously passed a resolution forcing Trump to condemn the folks who showed up in Charlottesville with a permit to legally and peacefully protest the removal of a Robert E. Lee statue, until they were set up by the governor of Virginia and the mayor of Charlottesville and were attacked by leftist thugs known as Antifa. Congress forced Trump's hand by introducing the measure as a joint resolution, which requires the president's signature, rather than a concurrent resolution, which does not. So one-sided and polarized has the elite presented the country as through its corrupt media that the president was demonized for suggesting that both sides bore some blame in Charlottesville, an incredible phenomenon by any means. The joint resolution, put forth by both houses of Congress, begins with a lie. The Virginia State Police officers who died in the faulty helicopter had left the protest area some time before it crashed. They were not victims of the Charlottesville chaos. In addition, the measure classifies white nationalists as a hate group. It is not acceptable to be proud of one's white heritage, and ends with no mention of the leftist agitators, Antifa and Black Lives Matter, although almost all in the streets were white, who threw feces and urine at the peaceful protesters as well as attacked them physically. S.J. Res. 49 states in full, a joint resolution condemning the violence and domestic terrorist attack that took place during events between August 11 and August 12, 2017, in Charlottesville, VA, recognizing the first responders who lost their lives while monitoring the events, offering deepest condolences to the families and friends of those individuals who were killed and deepest sympathies and support to those individuals who were injured by the violence, expressing support for the Charlottesville community, rejecting white nationalists, white supremacists, the Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazis, and other hate groups, and urging the president and the president's cabinet to use all available resources to address the threats posed by those groups. Although forced to sign the ridiculous resolution, Trump struck a tone of defiance. While speaking to reporters on Air Force One about his meeting with South Carolina Senator Timothy Eugene Scott, the only black Republican in the Senate, Trump said, "We had a great talk yesterday. I think especially in light of the advent of Antifa you have some pretty bad dudes on the other side also. Now, because of what's happened since Charlottesville, a lot of people are saying, in fact, a lot of people have actually written, gee, Trump might have a point, although the man is being constantly attacked from almost all sides, he has still made some remarkable progress, a testament to the billionaire's fortitude. No, he hasn't yet repealed Obamacare, reformed the country's tax code, repaired the failing infrastructure, or secured funding for a wall on the Mexican border, but he has successfully dismantled, in his first 8 months in office, Barack Obama's executive action legacy, a feat not lost on America's first black president, who commented on the issue on social media, as the late AFP reporter Victor Thorne wrote in August 2012, although executive orders, EOs, were, used as a way to establish schedules for executive office employees or to help agencies under the White House carry out their duties. They are increasingly being used as a means to bypass the due process of proper legislation, wrote Thorne. President Barack Obama is following on the heels of previous presidents such as Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, whose disdain for constitutional checks and balance was often evident in the flurry of executive orders and presidential decision directives signed in an effort to get around Congress. Through these, Obama is bypassing the legislative process and instead relying on making up the rules himself through various governmental agencies and hand-selected czars. And while Obama, who has issued 134 EOs, does not hold a candle to past presidents like FDR, who issued an incredible 3,522 EOs, or Woodrow Wilson, who signed 1,807 EOs. His use is pushing the bounds for which they were originally intended. By comparison, George Washington issued 8 EOs, and Thomas Jefferson signed only 4. Trump's most recent target was DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which Obama implemented in 2012. President Obama bypassed Congress to give work permits, Social Security numbers, and federal benefits to approximately 800,000 illegal immigrants currently between the ages of 15 and 36, said a September 5 White House statement. Only by the reliable enforcement of immigration law can we produce safe communities, a robust middle class, and economic fairness for all Americans. Disappointingly, Trump seems to be backing off his initial tough stance against DACA, as the president promised while campaigning in Virginia in 2015. We are going to be unsigning a lot of executive orders, especially Obama's order that basically lets anybody they want just pour into our country. In July, Trump took aim at Obama's decision that allowed transgender individuals to serve in the U.S. military. The president wants those unsure of their sex out of the U.S. Armed Forces by March. That same month, Trump also announced America's withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, known also as the Paris Climate Accord or Paris Climate Agreement, the environmental pact Obama joined through an executive order. A few days after taking office, Trump gave the go-ahead for the Keystone XL and Dakota Access oil pipelines, followed by his March executive order, symbolically announced at the headquarters of the Environmental Protection Agency, calling for a review of Obama's Clean Power Plan, which would have closed hundreds of coal-fired power plants, frozen construction of new plants and replaced them with vast new wind and solar farms. "Come on, fellas," said Trump to the coal miners present for the signing. "You know what this is? You know what this says? You're going back to work. It sure feels nice to have a president who cares about all Americans." Who's behind Canadian smear job? Alberta professor suspended after anti-Semitic posts were placed on his social media site, by Kevin Barrett. In late August 2016, an offensive, illegal image was planted, by a person or persons unknown, on Professor Anthony Hall's Facebook page. The image portrayed a white man assaulting a Jewish man, alongside text reading, "There never was a Holocaust, but there should have been, and, rest assured, there will be." The rest of the text is too vile to print here. The unsuspecting Hall, traveling at the time, never saw the post, but B'nai B'rith did. B'nai B'rith is the Canadian equivalent of America's Anti-Defamation League. They were monitoring Hall's Facebook page far more closely than Hall himself was. The Israeli Front Group issued a flurry of statements vilifying the professor and implying that he was responsible for the planted image. Canadian mainstream media outlets echoed B'nai B'rith's libelous charges. B'nai B'rith's allies then unleashed a torrent of defamation against Hall. On September 1, 2016, the president of the Canadian Jewish Civil Rights Association wrote to the University of Lethbridge, where Hall is a professor, falsely asserting that the horrendous words from the planted "Kill All Jews" Facebook image came directly from the lips of Hall. Another letter to the president of the University of Lethbridge, copied to the Premier of Alberta and the Alberta Justice Minister, called Hall an advocate for the murder of Jews. University of Lethbridge President Mike Mahone suspended Hall without pay and prohibited him from setting foot on campus. There were no hearings, no due process, no investigation, just a unilateral assertion by Mahone, unsupported by any evidence, that Hall might have violated the Alberta Human Rights Act. Mahone himself, purporting to speak for the university, later filed a human rights complaint against Hall. Mahone argued that Hall might be guilty of a human rights violation because Hall's Facebook page had been used for virulent anti-Semitic comments. Mahone failed to mention that the virulent comments had been planted, unbeknownst to Hall, most likely by Hall's enemies. Mahone also charged Hall with inferring that Israelis, and hence Jewish individuals, were responsible for the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001, but why is that any more bigoted than inferring that Saudis, and hence Muslims, were responsible for the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001, as the mainstream media does? In fact, 34 million Muslims have been murdered, according to Dr. Gideon Polya, due to the 9/11 fueled Islamophobia that drives the 9/11 wars. Yet the human rights complaint against Hall asserts that anyone who rejects this genocidal Islamophobia, and the 9/11 official conspiracy theory behind it, is a bigot. The complaint insists that acts of terrorism between 2001 to the present were in fact committed and financed by Islamic terrorists. By questioning that dubious proposition, the complainants assert, Hall somehow violated the Alberta Human Rights Act. In fact, the individuals who called for the murder of all Jews were those who manufactured and planted the offending image on Hall's Facebook page. According to an investigation by Ben Garrison, a Jewish Zionist named Joshua Goldberg created the image. Unknown internet hackers then planted it to frame Hall. Goldberg and the hackers should be charged with incitement to murder and incitement to genocide. The hackers should also be charged with conspiracy to commit defamation of character, obstruction of justice, and providing of false evidence. Likewise, B'nai B'rith and the Canadian Jewish Civil Rights Association should be charged with defamation of character. All of these individuals and groups should wind up paying Hall tens of millions of dollars in civil damages on top of their prison sentences. Unfortunately, it is far from certain that justice will prevail. Certain groups seem to have a license to commit frame-ups with impunity. After all, virtually every major radical Muslim terror attack since the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993 has featured one or more apparent frame-ups. In almost all cases, passports or ID cards have been planted at the scene of the crime to inculpate the designated Muslim patsies. On 9/11, the only thing left of the planes that supposedly crashed in New York and Shanksville were hijackers' passports that miraculously turned up to identify the supposed perpetrators. Subsequent Islamic terror attacks, including the killing of writers and artists at the French magazine Charlie Hebdo, the follow-up November 13, 2015 Paris attacks, and various vehicular homicides in London, Manchester, and elsewhere have all featured throwdown ID documents allowing police to instantly blame the designated scapegoats. The Tsarnaev brothers were also identified as being behind the Boston bombings, despite photo evidence that cast doubt on their guilt. A Pakistani couple was named as being behind the mass shooting in San Bernardino, Calif., despite witness reports that 3 large white men in paramilitary outfits did it. Could the same forces that frame Muslim terrorists also be behind the frame-up of Hall? Christian group strikes back against SPLC hate labeling. SPLC exec admits he wants to destroy good organizations. By the American Free Press staff, the Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLC, with some $353 million in assets, is sinister and hazardous, damaging the reputations of organizations it decides to smear as hate groups. The SPLC's labels have been used by federal agencies as well as some private organizations to target individuals and groups in the U.S. One Information Service, specializing in reporting on U.S. nonprofit companies. GuideStar went so far as to post SPLC hate group labels alongside some organizations' entries. It temporarily ceased that practice in response to an uproar on the part of conservative groups, but says it will continue to provide the information upon request. Recently, a pair of civil lawsuits were filed by Christian ministries against the SPLC and GuideStar. Liberty Counsel has sued GuideStar, and E. James Kennedy Ministries sued both GuideStar and the SPLC. In both cases, the plaintiffs seek a permanent injunction against the use of the SPLC's hate group label and damages. Liberty Counsel's 31-page lawsuit against GuideStar cites the SPLC's alleged examples of defamation and religious discrimination. Mark Potok, senior fellow at the SPLC, has made their job easy, often repeating the bogus claims multiple times, including on audio files on Internet archives. "We see this as a political struggle," Potok states in an audio file transcription presented to the court. "We are trying to wreck the groups, and we are very clear in our head, we are trying to destroy them as a political matter, to destroy them," he added. Sometimes the press will describe SPLC as monitoring hate groups and so on. I want to say plainly that our aim is to destroy these groups, to completely destroy them. GuideStar's attorney, the high-priced Washington firm Hunton & Williams, has filed a motion to dismiss, claiming the organization correctly stated the SPLC labeled Liberty Counsel a hate group and no libel was committed. The attorneys also claim the word hate describes subjective feelings and emotions. The word also admits a broad range of uses and meanings. Hunton & Williams lawyers further argue that the labeling on GuideStar's compilation was not commercial speech. Fortunately, in this case, Liberty Counsel asked for a judge and not a jury. Both Liberty Counsel and the SPLC rely on the generosity of donors. If the Christian group can present supporters who stopped donating or decided not to donate after seeing the SPLC's label on GuideStar, would that open a viewpoint of a reasonable reader? Question. In this case, Liberty Counsel did not make such a claim in its filing, but it would have been interesting. On the issue of violence, it is the SPLC, not Liberty Counsel, that has been linked to violent attacks. Attempted mass murderer James Hodgkinson, the man who shot and critically wounded Rep. Steve Scalise, our law and congressional staffers on June 15, had followed the SPLC on social media and wanted to murder pro-life and anti-abortion lawmakers, according to federal investigators. 5 years prior to that, Floyd Corkins II attempted to commit mass murder in the Washington, D.C. Office of Family Research Council, FRC, another Christian group designated as haters by the SPLC. Corkins said his motivation was based on the SPLC's designation of FRC as a hate group and its hate map that provides the addresses of those organizations labeled as hate groups. Congress says white groups are terrorists. Lawmakers condemn peaceful protesters, remain silent about leftist violence. By John Friend. The Senate and House recently passed a joint resolution specifically condemning white nationalists and other so-called hate groups, including neo-Nazis, the Ku Klux Klan and white supremacists, and urged President Donald Trump to speak out against such groups and devote federal resources toward addressing the purported threat posed by them. The resolution, S.J. Res. 49, was introduced by Senator Mark Warner, DEVA, with the support of Sens. Tim Kaine, DEVA, Cory Gardner, Arcalo, and others in the wake of the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, VA, a rally legally organized by leading members of the so-called alt-right that was sabotaged by a combination of state and local police, state of Virginia political officials, and a violent crowd of radical leftist counter-protesters. The rally resulted in the death of Heather Heyer, a 32-year-old woman who was among the counter-protesters when she was struck by a vehicle driven into a crowd by a young man who was there to support the alt-right. The circumstances surrounding the car crash and Ms. Heyer's death remain murky. Some allege that the driver of the vehicle, James Alex Fields Jr., was violently attacked in his vehicle by counter-protesters shortly before he drove into the crowd. Fields allegedly has had a troubled history, having been accused in the past of assaulting his own mother on 2 occasions, and was reportedly on medication to help manage his outbursts of anger. The joint resolution, which was approved by the Senate on September 11 and by the House on September 12, condemns the racist violence and domestic terrorist attack that took place during the Unite the Right rally, while completely ignoring and dismissing the violence committed by counter-protesters that day. It also offers condolences and support to the Hayer family and families of the state police officers killed when their helicopter crashed as it left the Charlottesville area, and specifically rejects white nationalism, white supremacy, and neo-Nazism as hateful expressions of intolerance that are contradictory to the values that define the people of the United States. The resolution goes on to demand that President Donald Trump speak out against hate groups that espouse racism, extremism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism and white supremacy, and to devote federal resources to address the growing prevalence of those hate groups in the United States. Days after the resolution was adopted, Trump signed and endorsed it, saying he rejected bigotry in all its forms. No matter the color of our skin or our ethnic heritage, we all live under the same laws, we all salute the same great flag, and we are all made by the same Almighty God, Trump declared in a statement following his endorsement of the resolution. Shortly after signing the joint resolution, during a conference call with a number of prominent Jewish groups, Trump condemned those who spread anti-Semitism. We forcefully condemn those who seek to incite anti-Semitism or to spread any form of slander and hate, and I will ensure we protect Jewish communities, and all communities, that face threats to their safety, Trump stated during the call. The president has come under fire for not denouncing the alt-right rally and its organizers quickly or forcefully enough. Never mind that the rally was legally organized and represented an entirely legitimate expression of the First Amendment. The highly distorted controlled media narrative immediately disseminated during and after the rally portrayed the alt-right rally attendees as unhinged, violent white supremacists, neo-Nazis and Klansmen who were determined to violently confront the leftist counter-protesters who mobilized across the city of Charlottesville in response to the rally. In reality, the vast majority of the violence was initiated and instigated by the radical leftist counter-protesters themselves, who threw urine and feces not only at alt-right demonstrators but also at media and police officers. In light of the joint resolution and Trump's endorsement of it, many Americans are left wondering when a similar resolution will be adopted and endorsed that specifically denounces and rejects the radical left, which has for decades engaged in blatant acts of violence, intimidation and terrorism. In recent years, various leftist groups, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, radical communists, anti-capitalists and anarchists, have become increasingly bold and violent, particularly since Trump stepped onto the political scene. Black Lives Matter activists have burned down and looted entire neighborhoods, while Antifa and other radical leftists have attacked Trump supporters, damaged and destroyed private property, and otherwise engaged in violence and mayhem in a variety of cities across the United States. Efforts are already underway to demand Trump declare Antifa a terrorist organization. So far, though, Trump and other federal officials have not made any decisive moves to condemn and reject the radical left, which truly does pose a threat to the safety and security of Americans. Dev execs not changing their ways. News that top dog at disabled veterans group makes $600,000 has vets angry, by Dave Gahary. When this reporter was summarily tossed out of the veterans charity, the Disabled American Veterans, DEV, in February 2014 for shining a light on the ungodly sums the officers of that 501(c)(4) organization were paying themselves, it seemed beyond reason that their incomes could climb much higher. Last month, however, when the DAV's Internal Revenue Service Form 990 for 2016 was released on the organization's website, the quaint belief that somehow greed could be contained was shown the door. In 5 short years, since this newspaper first analyzed DAV 2011 Form 990, a leader of that organization saw his income more than double, from $263,185 to $527,292. Incredibly, a portion of his income, $225,450, over 40%, was classified as retirement and other deferred compensation, and is not taxed. In other words, while most Americans, especially disabled veterans, are living paycheck to paycheck. Dav's head is paid so much that almost half of that income can be set aside for retirement and is not needed today. Other highly compensated individuals employed by the charity also saw huge hikes in their pay over that same time period, though nowhere near what the top dog, Mississippi-born J. Mark Burgess, brought home. His pay is even more striking given the fact that the charity didn't have such a great year. It brought in around $2 million less than the year before and still managed to lose around $12 million, that is, revenues less expenses. Never mind the fact that on any given night, there are tens of thousands of veterans who call the street their home. The 1.3 million member DAV, founded in 1920 to help disabled veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces, returning from World War I, and their families adapt to living with physical and mental disabilities, is chartered by Congress and headquartered in Cold Spring, CA. Every state in the Union has a DAV department, including Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico, and each of those has chapters associated with it. Currently, there are approximately 1,300 chapters across the country. The primary function of the DAV has been to serve as the veterans advocate for filing Veterans Administration, VA, disability claims. American Free Press interviewed 75-year-old, 100% disabled American veteran Stephen I. Marcus, a former member of the DAV, for his views on the 2016 Form 990. I have a lot of friends who are active members of the DAV, he began, but on the local level, and they do good work in the local community with the veterans, but at the very top of the DAV, to me, they're all bloodsuckers. They're self-serving. They fly an airplane and they get guys like that actor, Danny Aiello, who goes on television. When I ran into Danny, because he doesn't live that far from me, I told him, you know, Danny, I love you as an actor, but somebody's giving you bad news, because the Disabled American Veterans is a rip-off. Marcus touched on the ongoing scandalous tragedy of veterans dying on VA waiting lists for healthcare while the DAV feeds at the Gilded Trough. These bloodsuckers take money. They fly a plane all over the country, he bemoaned. What the hell does that do for the disabled American veterans when guys wait in line and die? I think 20 veterans a day die waiting in line at the VA. Marcus commented upon the fact that so many veterans are homeless in this once great nation, while organizations like the DAV never seem to tire of enriching themselves. It's totally disgraceful that we do this, really and truly, he said. These are people, patriots, who serve the country honorably. Remember, when we raised our right hand, we swore to uphold the Constitution, and if necessary we would give our life for our country. But at the same time we expected that if we got hurt we'd be taken care of. And they're not being taken care of. It's a disgrace. Marcus directed his criticism at those who are at the top of the DAV. These people are self-serving. All they're interested in is money. Marcus continued, if you want to help veterans, why don't you give back all your money, and give it to the veterans who need the help? AFP asked Mr. Marcus to reflect on the fact that Burgess's annual income has not only exceeded that of the President of the United States but should surpass the $1 million mark in a few years. If I sound sarcastic, I am, he said. If I sound bitter, I am. I don't even want to admit anymore that I belonged to the DAV at one time. As far as I'm concerned, the only thing disabled about them is their ability to take care of the people. U.S. working to ensure Armageddon. American people need to stop fighting over statues and focus on the real threat. By Paul Craig Roberts. The latest spin on Russia stole the election is that Russia used Facebook to influence the election. The United States shows the world such a ridiculous face that the world laughs at us. We have been subjected to 10 months of propaganda about Trump-Putin election interference and still not a scrap of evidence. It is past time to ask an unasked question. If there were evidence, what is the big deal? All sorts of interest groups try to influence election outcomes, including foreign governments. Why is it okay for Israel to influence U.S. elections but not for Russia to do so? Why do you think the armament industry, the energy industry, agribusiness, Wall Street and the banks, pharmaceutical companies etc. supply huge sums of money to finance election campaigns if their intent is not to influence the election? Why do editorial boards write editorials endorsing one candidate and damning another if they are not influencing the election? What is the difference between influencing the election and influencing the government? Washington is full of lobbyists of all descriptions, including lobbyists for foreign governments, working around the clock to influence the U.S. government. It is safe to say that the least represented in the government are the citizens themselves, who don't have any lobbyists working for them. The orchestrated hysteria over Russian influence is even more absurd considering the reason Russia allegedly interfered in the election. Russia favored Donald Trump because he was the peace candidate who promised to reduce the high tensions with Russia created by the Obama regime and its neocons, Hillary Clinton, Victoria Nuland, Susan Rice, and Samantha Power. What's wrong with Russia preferring a peace candidate over a war candidate? The American people themselves prefer the peace candidate, so Russia agreed with the electorate. Those who don't agree with the electorate are the warmongers, the military security complex and the neocons. These are democracy's enemies, who are trying to overturn the choice of the American people. It is not Russia that disrespects the choice of the American people. It is the utterly corrupt Democratic National Committee and its divisive identity politics, the military security complex, and the prostitute media that are undermining democracy. I believe it is time to change the subject. The important question is, who is it that is trying so hard to convince Americans that Russian influence prevails over us? Do the idiots pushing this line realize how impotent this makes an alleged superpower look? How can we be the hegemonic power that the Zionist neocons say we are when Russia can decide who is the president of the United States? The U.S. has a massive spy state that even intercepts the private cell phone conversations of the Chancellor of Germany, but this massive spy organization is unable to produce one scrap of evidence that the Russians conspired with Trump to steal the presidential election from Hillary. When will the imbeciles realize that when they make charges for which no evidence can be produced, they make the United States look incompetent beyond all belief? Countries are supposed to be scared of America's threat that we will bomb you into the Stone Age, but the president of Russia laughs at us. Putin recently described the complete absence of any competence in Washington. It is difficult to talk to people who confuse Austria and Australia, but there is nothing we can do about this. This is the level of political culture among the American establishment. As for the American people, America is truly a great nation if the Americans can put up with so many politically uncivilized people in their government. These words from Putin were devastating, because the world understands that they are accurate. Consider the idiot Nikki Haley, appointed by Trump in a fit of mindlessness as U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. This stupid person is forever shaking her fist at the Russians while mouthing yet another improbable accusation. She might want to read Mario Puzo's book, The Godfather. Everyone knows the movie, but if memory serves, somewhere in the book Puzo reflects on the practice of the irate American motorist who shakes a fist and gives the bird to other drivers. What if the driver receiving the insult is a mafia capo? Does the idiot shaking his fist know who he is accosting? No. Does the moron know that the result might be a brutal beating or death? No. Does Ambassador Haley understand what can be the result of her inability to control herself? No. Every knowledgeable person I know wonders if Trump appointed Mrs. Haley U.S. ambassador to the world for the purpose of infuriating the Russians. Ask Napoleon and the German Wehrmacht the consequence of infuriating the Russians. After 16 years, the U.S. superpower has been unable to defeat a few thousand lightly armed Taliban, who have no air force, no panzer divisions, no worldwide intelligence service, and the crazed U.S. government in Washington is courting war with Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. The American people are clearly out to lunch in their insouciance. Americans are fighting among themselves over Civil War statues, while their government invites nuclear Armageddon. The United States has an ambassador to the world who shows no signs of intelligence and who is the antithesis of a diplomat. What does this tell you about the United States? It reveals that the United States is in the Roman collapse stage when the emperor appoints horses to the Senate. America is a joke with nuclear weapons, the prime danger to life on Earth. How can this danger be corralled? The American people would have to realize that they are being led to their deaths by Zionist neocons who, together with the military security complex and Wall Street, control U.S. foreign policy by the complicity of Europe and Great Britain desperate to retain their CIA subsidies and by the harlots that comprise the Western media. The consequence is that America is being locked into conflict with Russia and China. There is no possibility of Washington invading either country, much less both, so war would be nuclear. Do the American people want Washington to bring us this result? If not, why are the American people doing nothing? Why are Europe and Great Britain sitting there permitting the unfolding of nuclear Armageddon? Who murder the peace movement? The world and the American people need desperately to rein in the warmonger United States, or the world will cease to exist. An international court to preserve life on Earth needs to be assembled. The U.S. government and the war interests it serves need to be indicted, prosecuted, and disarmed before their evil destroys life on Earth.